All right, Peter, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stan, and welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us. And a special thank you to the three guests who are going to be talking to us today with us and sharing their ideas. We want to make this a very collaborative event. So if you feel that at some point you would like to interject with a question, please do so. At the end, the last 10 or 15 minutes, we're hoping that there will be opportunity for conversation. So I think, like to start by introducing Yong Zhao. Yong is the Foundation Distinguished Professor in the School of Education at the University of Kansas and shares his time and his work there with educational leadership at the Melbourne Graduate School. I believe I have got that right. Have I, Yong? He's the author of many books, an astonishingly brilliant mind, and Stan and I had the privilege of hearing him quite a few years ago now. Stan and I were presenting in Australia, and you were the keynote, you might remember, in Cairns. Stan, we were impressed, weren't we, to say the least? What are your memories of that time?
Oh, that was great, because being in that giant conference, and it was encompassing all the people from the southern end of the world, and it was great. And one of the big things that stuck out for me in that particular keynote was you were talking about getting your child out of your basement. It was wonderful. That was a great speech to go, what are we doing to engage a generation of people learning to motivate them to get going, right? So it really stuck with me, and that's been something where I've carried that with me throughout my career since from coming back. So I'm looking forward to what we can add back in here today.
Thank you, Stan, Peter.
Oh, you're welcome. One of the things I loved, I'm from Liverpool in England, Yong, so we have a fairly hefty sense of humor. And when I heard you talk about and liken the school system to sausage factories, I burst out laughing. And I was annoyed because I wish I'd thought of that myself. In fact, I'm going to claim it in the future as having been my idea. Talk to us about sausage factories, Yong, please. Where did that come from?
Well, thank you, Peter, Stan, and everybody who can join. Ever since that presentation in Cairns, I found it to be a kind of worse schools. I used to be, I came out of schools. We all are in schools or have been to schools. We're generally very nice to, our host institutions. Somehow we all went through that system. It's very hard to betray that. When I talk about a sausage factory, at least it produces some sausage. So that's not a bad thing if you love sausages. I think right now, after the COVID pandemic, not really after, we're still in the midst of it, at least after 2 years or 3 years of dealing with it, we're actually seeing a lot more problems with schools. We just published a new book. It's called Learning for Uncertainty. Yeah. And that is, uncertainty has really become the norm. But I don't think schools have tried to deal with that. You look at the Russia invasion of Ukraine, look at China's airplane suddenly dropped. We still don't know why. I mean, look at the widespread uncertainty of COVID. These, are quite serious disasters in our world. And I mean, I'm not a religious person, but if you read the Bible, you will see all the plagues that have kind of dawned on humanity. And at the same time, you look at our schools amazingly still don't change its fundamentals. We have moved online, we have done virtual. Now we are really eager to go back to normal, as if the normal was good, yes. As if there was a normal. Absolutely. So this is really really unhappy time. And I think Peter, Stan, you look very young, I guess, but Peter and I maybe old. So I've come up with a new theme, which I really would like to explore a little bit with you. Yeah. It's called the children versus the curriculum. I think the school's biggest problem is really it has to have a curriculum. You know, any school you go to, they have to have a curriculum, no matter what the curriculum is, that they have to have a sequenced, scoped curriculum for all children. And no matter where you go, what you do, right? I mean, we have to have one. And you can define that as math, reading, or you can add civics, add religion, add character build, whatever you build. And the curriculum has really several problems. You know, one problem is that, you know, schools actually have children. That's a big problem. If schools, you know, had no kids, you know, the curriculum would run too smoothly, right? You know, not only we have children, but we got children who are alive. You know, that's another problem, right? You know, if you think of, this is actually really quite amazing. You have a curriculum, you expect all the live and the many children to learn it, but not only learn it at the same time. Do you notice that? You know, we want you to say, you got to do reading by 3rd grade, you got to do math, but if you cannot do math or reading by 3rd grade, your chance of going to jail goes very high. That's the general agreement. And but you know, not only are children alive, they have intentions. That's another problem with our kids. So they're not like a computer. You can program it to do whatever you like, unless you're, you know, a bad programmer. That would be bad. But the idea of everybody getting the same thing at the same time, a homogeneous education system is probably the worst to deal with uncertainty. Because, you know, you plan everything for these children. Like you guys said, okay, yeah, you live in Ottawa, you know, or Liverpool. You said, okay, we want you to come to Ottawa at this time, but boom, you did not realize the truck drivers will drive all the cars, you know, in Ottawa, you know. So this is actually quite interesting. So I had an analogy. I said, you know, human beings, human educators are quite brave and quite courageous. And sometimes we are courageous to a degree that we're chasing fantasy. And that is, you know, we believe we can teach everybody to learn everything, which is kind of true, but not entirely. So, you know, you can teach everybody, for example, to paint, but you cannot teach everybody to become a Picasso. So, this is what I call the live bird versus dead bird problem. You know, if you try to throw bird, you know, I don't know if in Canada you got that practice. If you, or in England, you pick up a bird, you try to throw them in the sky or in wherever you want to throw them. If you had a dead bird, you could kind of predict where the bird lands. You know, that is the traditional curriculum idea, right? We expect all of it learn the same thing at the same time. But you try to throw a live bird. If you catch a live bird and throw it, do you think you can predict where the live birds will land? You probably won't. Now that's our problem in schools. We got live and diverse children. We have, however, a dead, homogeneous curriculum that pretends there is a future in there is a future in kids' life. That's why all our schools and all of the, I say, you know, Fiona, Rebecca, you know, and other people here, we always try to predict our kids will land into a future. So we in our schools, we have the, I call the biggest lie in education is we will get you ready for the future. And we'll get you ready for the future. That's quite brave. When you don't even know what the future is, you cannot. And also our children. Our children are the creators of the future. So what I've trying to change that, Peter, is to say, how do we get our kids to create their future? Create actually their futures or a future. That is our challenge. You know, they are not going to be ready for uncertain future. We will get them ready to create our future and their future. And by the way, their future is actually our retirement. So we want them to create a better future for us to retire in. So I would just stop there, think about the issue. Live children, dead curriculum, diverse children, homogeneous curriculum. how do we help our children? I think Peter and Stan, your book, our wonderful, the books you've written, how do you get children to imagine, to create their future?
Just a quick follow-up. That's just wonderful, Yong. Wow, you really got us all thinking here. It's a question I pose a lot to people. It's this: if you had a magic wand and a blank slate, and somebody gave you the authority to create your own learning culture, what would be some of the unshakable foundational elements of that culture? In other words, how would you go from theory to practice? Can you please give us that in 3 minutes, Yong?
Well, that's tough. That's a lot of money, a lot of power with the only 3 minutes. But you know, I don't think I want that magic wand. I don't think I want that authority, because education is something that's extremely difficult to change, because there are so many people interested in education for non-student reasons. You probably know that, you know, if you're a government politician, you are thinking about votes. If you are a business person, education, you think about your profit. And even if you're a teacher, you have other things to think about. And so the challenge is that we have not let our students run their schools. And there are occasional cases I've seen that students actually can run their schools. So if you look at all the reform efforts, Ontario has done a lot. You know, some claim to be successful, but I don't see Ontarians coming out to be very different from the BC people. I don't think your reforms have been actually that great. But however, you know, there's stories you can write about. I think that you know, in the US for over the last 50 years, we don't see any improvement, you know, despite all the reform efforts. The biggest problem is we have not put our children as the driver of their schooling. As I said before, we use schools, we use curriculum, we use adults to drive children's life. And we have changed the curriculum, we've changed teachers, we've changed the assessment, but we have not created space. So I think the first thing is that, can schools create space and time for children to take ownership of their own learning, to be for children to define their own learning? What I would like to do is every child should develop their own strength profile, so they know what they're good at, what they're passionate about, and then they can translate their unique passion and strength into products or solutions to other people's problems. So you can serve others. That is, you create something that's of value to other people. I think that's the key. But now we don't do that because we're so concerned about children learning what we want them to learn. You know, we always ask questions, well, how do you know kids are learning what they want them? I say, well, you know, God, humanities, that's probably, we have to let them drive that. So children are the owner of their own learning. We are here to support and serve them in that regard. That's about 5 minutes. Sorry about that.
That's fantastic. And what a brilliant segue you have just provided as we introduce the next guest, who is Rebecca Chambers. Rebecca and I go way back. And I think it was, we first met, when I was the superintendent of leadership and creativity here in Ottawa for 12 years, we created a creativity movement, which was a series of events, 7 or 8 events each year, which were all threaded together to create the space for people to make sense of the world in a way the world made sense to them. And so we would have these amazing creative initiatives at everywhere, hundreds and hundreds of them through the years. And one of the people who became involved in that was Rebecca. And Rebecca, I remember well you telling me that there were, through that process, it catalyzed your own thinking about your own role as a teacher and how you acted as a teacher. Can you give us a glimpse into that journey, please, Rebecca?
Sure thing. So Yeah, so I met Peter years ago at a conference that was held by the OCDSB called Lead the Way. And I got to hear him speak, and I got to hear Sir Ken Robinson speak at that. And that was in probably like 2000 and I don't know, 8 or 9. And I remember listening to it and then actually going and finding more of Sir Ken's talks and listening and going, oh my goodness, there's somebody else out there that thinks like me and is actually putting it into words. I'd never had the words. It was always in me. And I just didn't realize that there were other people who thought that way. I just thought I was kind of one of a kind, or I guess maybe I am one of a kind. And I think one of the reasons I was sort of thinking I was on my own was I was a student that was disengaged. And I became a teacher knowing that I wanted to change things for kids that were like me. There was a lot of teachers in my family, and so it kind of was the family profession. And so I went down that road knowing that, things needed to be different. But up until the point that I went to that conference, I still did things very traditionally. I tried to make it a little bit more fun. We did, like, I taught history. So we would, do a fashion show. We would research, fashion from the different eras, and we would try and do a little fashion show, or we would go outside and play in the trenches to learn about trench warfare. And I realized that, yes, those things were fun and the kids were engaged, but I really wasn't changing the way I was teaching. I was still just using that dead curriculum. I love that term. And just sort of entertaining the kids. And so it was at that point that I really sort of tried to look further and look at all kinds of different models around the world where people were doing things differently. And I met a man named Don Wettrick, who is in Indiana, and he had really done some major reforms in his way of teaching. Connected with him. I learned about a school in Massachusetts that actually had the kids running. It's called the Independent Project, where the kids ran the school. I learned about another one in the States called Iowa Big, where the kids are working with industry partners and solving problems. And I was like, wow, like, look at all these amazing things. I'm going to try and replicate this. And so I'd say in the last maybe like 5 to 10 years, I really started to implement some of these ways, really bringing the kids in. And when you were talking about the creating the space and the time for children to take ownership of their own learning, that's where I really saw the kids get engaged and really kind of, we used the dead curriculum as our sort of guiding force, because that's what the ministry says I have to use. But we did actually create that strength profile where the kids looked at, who am I? What am I all about? Where do I come from? What do I care about? We use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to look for problems in our world and find ways to create solutions. Yeah.
I just want to, in 5 minutes, take them right down into what it actually looks like in your classroom. So I became a big fan of Rebecca's and went into her classroom, I don't know how many times. But it looks like organized chaos. There are no texts, there are no exams, there are no tests.
Yeah.
Give us the elevator speech. What do you do?
So at the beginning of the course, I actually have to take a week and I call it the Unlearning week, because I tell the kids, you've walked through my doors. This is not going to look like regular school. And I actually show them the Independent Project, and I show them, I'm like, look at what school could be. And this is what we're going to be doing, which for some kids, like you're going to meet Fiona, she was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And for other kids, it was terrifying, because they were like, but I've learned how school works and this isn't how school works. So you're telling me I'm not going to write a test, like what's going on? So we go through that, and they're kind of brainwashed a bit, I guess, into my methods. And from there, we ask them, we go through a series of, who are you? What do you care about? What are you really good at? What are you, and they have a hard time with that. What do you care about? Because they've never been asked. And as we all know, it's really hard to talk about your strengths, and you feel like you're bragging or whatever. And so we kind of get through that. We muddle through that. And we find out as much as possible as we can. And then from there, we work on passion projects. And we find an issue in our world. Again, we go to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that was one of my hardest things, was how do I help these kids figure out what they care about? I started by showing them PSAs. I tried to dig, and having conversations with them. That was one of my biggest issues. But then when I learned about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, I was like, whoa, here we go. They've got all this material and they're telling me what all these issues are. And I say to the kids, which one of these breaks your heart? Which one of these do you want to work on? And be a tiny part of the solution. And then we go from there, and they research about the issue. They then connect with people in the community. So that's a huge component, because I want them to see that what we're working on is real life stuff. It's not just in a textbook. It's not something that, we're just going to write on a test and then it's going to be gone. We're going to see real life people doing real life work. They're going to then create solutions, their own solutions to problems, and they're going to take action, and they're actually going to do something. And we use social media, and we get it out into all kinds of different spaces. Some of the kids were in newspapers. We were picked up by TV. We were picked up by, just people wanting to hear more and being so excited that these kids had a voice. And then at the end of the semester, we had a big celebration where we invited all those community members. We invited people from the board. The mayor would come. Peter was there every single time. And the kids got to celebrate, and they got to showcase, and they got to say, look at what I did. I made a difference in someone's life, and I was able to learn curriculum as I went. So then my job as the educator was to find ways to guide them and say, okay, if we're working on English, you need to do a writing piece, or you need to do a podcast, or you need to do whatever that curriculum piece would connect. And it really left them empowered. It left them excited about learning. And I was very lucky. I was actually in a specialized program where the kids, if they chose to come back to the social sciences, they got to do it again. And that was one of the really cool things, is if they started in grade 10 and they were lost, by grade 12, you should have seen the stuff that they were doing, because they had learned sort of that process.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough to go to, I think, just about every one of your celebrations of learning. And actually, I'm doing another presentation tonight, which I'm going to be showing some of those videos. But no matter which video you look at, there's always this bubble of excitement in that library as these other kids are presenting their brilliance. It really is. It is quite astonishing what you did. And what I love is that you did it in the context of the public education system. There is another element of this story, and I think it gets back to what Yong said. And I'm so glad that you said it about the Ontario reforms. I don't believe for a second there was any reform. Reform, to me, implies transformation. And all I can see is that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And if I hear anybody else talk to me about the new normal, I think I'm going to just have to have a beer or something. I shouldn't have said that loud. Okay, we're recording. So life-changing it was. And one of the people the very first person I connected with at a celebration of learning was Fiona Milligan. Now, Fiona, I have that video. Would you be okay if I played that, or would you just rather let me tell your story now from the perspective?
Honestly, it doesn't really matter. It was quite a few years ago, and I look a little different. But yeah, if you want to play the video, you're more than welcome.
I think it's just an emotional hook. It really gets to the power. Goran, can you give me the share screen capacity, please?
Yes, I'm just going to make certain you can do that. Okay, go ahead.
How do I do this? This might not be an issue. I can't get to the control. Huh, why is that? Let me just try
And
this.
Peter, are you
Sorry?
just trying to make the show the presentation in a full screen, or just to show the video?
I'm just showing the video.
Oh, okay. Let's see if it works. It seems to be showing on our screens, although
Okay.
I'm not certainly full.
Let's try it.
This is my second class with her. So for my inquiry, I did, these are 2 notes.
Yes.
This was from when I was in grade 6, and this was from when I was in grade 4. So,
Sorry.
this is my second class with her. Well, my mom kept these over the years because she thought something strange was about them. So,
Holy Jesus, that's powerful.
yeah, so in grade 4, okay.
Explain these notes to me.
Yeah, so this in grade 4, I felt like I wasn't strong with any school areas, so I thought I wasn't smart. I didn't feel smart. Things I struggled with, so I'm dyslexic. I have a hard time reading, spelling, math, talking, and a few other things that I thought just clearly when I was that age, I didn't know anything about the school system, but now when I'm older and I've learned a lot more, I can tell that the school system has clearly failed me. And that Miss Chambers, I appreciate so much what she's doing because she makes me feel smart. She makes me like remember that there's different types of learning and that just book smart, sitting at a desk, writing an essay, and handing it in on time isn't the only smart there is in the world. And for a very long time, I felt not like one of the smartest kids in the class just because of that.
Fiona, that's... I can't believe that your mum kept this. I want to meet your mum. And when did this one come from?
So this one was in grade 6. I felt like grade 6 is a big year. I felt like I had no friends. I didn't make the track and field team, but I'm over it now.
Wow.
I felt like I had no life, and then like again, the spelling is bad, but it says it sucks, and I'd like to kill me. I felt that bad about myself. Yeah, and this was in grade 6. So.
Thank you for letting me share that, Fiona. Every time I see it, I still shake my head. It's so powerful in the way you expressed it so brilliantly, and to think that you'd gone through all of those years of schooling having such tremendous difficulties. You want to reflect on that a little for us? And what was it about this new approach that really awakened you?
So for me, this is my first year out of school. I went to college last year and a few years before. So I was in Miss Chambers' class probably 4 or 5 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And I definitely, everyone has a different schooling experience. No two are the same, and no one should ever compare schooling experiences. So kind of for myself, I was diagnosed with dyslexia in grade 1. Growing up, I had a very, very strong support system from both my parents. I had also an amazing like EA teacher from grade 1 to grade 5. So for that, it was a breeze. When it started to be a problem was when I moved schools into middle school. I faced a lot of teachers and mentors and school boards and whatnot. I'm trying to be careful with what I say. Who just didn't believe that I had a learning disability, who told me that I was doing it for attention, who told me that if I just tried harder, it wouldn't be a problem, et cetera, et cetera. So I moved off to a private school here in Ottawa, it was all for dyslexics, but it was a quite expensive school, so I couldn't stay there for as long. But I wrote that in grade 6, that note, and I don't think at the time it was like malicious in any way, or but I think that was the only way that I could get it across to my parents, was like that I'm done. Like, I don't want to deal with this stuff anymore.
You went on now and you've created a business, a blog in the business, and it's called, if I'm correct, Downright Dyslexic.
Yeah.
Why did you create that?
So
what's your reason? Yeah.
It kind of started in Miss Chambers' class. We had to do I think it was called a passion project. And it was pretty much just do anything, but something that you're passionate about, and then like address it to the class however you do it. So I wrote a book, kind of, and it was called Dyslexic Daisy, and it was my story, but like broke down really, really easy, simplified words for little kids. So it'd be like a kid's storybook. And then I presented it in front of the class on a YouTube video, and then kind of some people started asking questions and whatnot, and that always kind of stayed in the back of my mind. In my first year at college, I remember my one teacher, Kurt Spady. He has amazing view on education, very similar to Miss Chambers. He just said, present me something. And I said, because he told me I could write a paper, and I told him I didn't want to. And he said, because it was a business class, he told me, why don't you come up with a business then? So I said, fine, easy. And so I kind of went through with it, and I didn't really know where I was going to go with it, or what the plan was. And then I remember one day after a hockey game, I was a very high performance athlete. We lost, and I was just angry at everything, angry at the world. So I just started typing and writing, and I stayed up very late. And then it just kind of hit me, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do something about this, and I'm gonna follow through with this. So I haven't been posting all that much lately, but I do plan on in the future too. But yeah, I posted blogs to help other kids or people who are dyslexic, or have family or loved ones that are dyslexic as well.
One of the things that I found profoundly moving about those blogs, Fiona, is you had your family reflect on their lives growing up with you. And so when the school system doesn't seem to be able to wrap its head around a child with a difference, well, everybody's got a difference, but somebody who has a particular difficulty and a challenge, the damage goes way beyond the individual child. And boy, do you get to that. Your mum and your sister writing about the deep impact that this had on the family.
Yeah.
What made you think of doing that? That's a pretty brave thing to do, to put yourself out there that much.
Well, I found the biggest thing growing up, I found you could always find information on dyslexia on the numbers and the stats, and you have trouble reading, but you don't hear the true stories, what goes on behind the scenes. And again, everyone's going to have a little bit of a different story, but for myself, I got my boyfriend to write what it's like to be in a relationship with a dyslexic. I got my sister to write what it's like to be a sibling, and then I got my mom to write what it's like to have a daughter that's dyslexic. And with my sisters, I would highly recommend going to read it. She's a very good writer.
Yeah.
She explained that later on down the years, we found out that she has ADHD, and she was suffering for so long because at the time, we were worried about me. We were worried about how I was going to get through school, how I was going to, make it to the next class, make it to the next grade, all that. So she was, I don't want to say put on the back burner, because my parents, of course, were great with her as well. But a lot of things were missed because the focus was on me and fighting for my rights in school and fighting that I had, the attention that I needed, the help that I needed, etc. So she talks a little bit about that, and she talks about, like, when I was younger, homework, school, anything like that was always a fight. It still probably would be a fight if I was in school. But it was always a fight. It was always at the dining room table. It was always a screaming match. So when it was, Fiona needed help with homework first before my brother and sister needed help with homework, because I wasn't getting the help at school. So
just to let people know, the book that is about to be published next week, my book called Thinker, Learner, Dreamer, Doer, actually profiles these two stories. It profiles 8 case studies and many other stories from around the world. And the purpose of this is, and it goes back to something that Yong said, when you create the space and the opportunity for young people's seeds of brilliance to flourish, then they will. I mean, I don't know how many, just in your case, Rebecca, I don't know how many hundreds of videos I've got of your students over the years, that, right? And eventually I'll have them all up online. But it is remarkable to see that in action. And it's so simple to do. The question I always come back to, so the when, why doesn't it happen? And of course, that gets into a whole other realm of, once you try to change the status quo, you better have a thick skin. I don't think we should go down that road right now. That's another conversation. But I'm going to open this up now. Thank you so much, Fiona, for that.
Peter, before you move on, I want to kind of pose just sort of a little bit of a question between Rebecca and Yong. So listening to Fiona's story, it's pretty safe to assume that the majority of us that are online here have all come up through the rigid dead curriculum system. Like, so, we came up through the Mr. Muggs era, the phonics, the repetitive penmanship, the mad minute, and it doesn't matter what age we all are, right? I'm 45, so I'm the trailing edges of that before we started to have a shift within the system. So what I'm hearing from Fiona, and it was interesting, I've seen that video a couple of times, and thank you, Peter, for sharing it, and thank you, Fiona, for doing it. It's that you were able to express your emotion. We've moved from a time where, for the most of us, when we were having educational difficulties, what Fiona faced was exactly what we went through. Get through it. You don't study hard enough. You're not paying enough attention. Let's move you to the front of the class because clearly you're too distracted at the back. So we're starting to tap into and looking for ways to get into students' emotions. It does matter how they feel about how they're learning. So how then can we take, as we're in a generational shift within our school boards? So again, we're seeing the last of yesterday's educators who have progressively moved into today, starting to retire, and the boards are currently peppered and salted with a lot of new and older teaching staff. How do we bridge this so that we don't get lost in what has made all of us successful to a degree with yesterday's learning to now where we need to kind of move more to a personal based learning? I know it's kind of a big question, but it's important to understand that as those of us that are here did come up through that, both right and wrong, then how do we be able to tap into the students like Fiona and not continue to let them feel that somebody's not listening? And whoever, Rebecca or Yong, whichever one wants to take, and I'd love to hear both opinions on that.
Rebecca, go for it. I think Rebecca's story is, I love the story. Fiona, you are amazing. That's just, you know, so that's exactly what we need you to do, but I want Rebecca to take on that. Yeah.
So it's a huge question.
It is.
I definitely have lived trying to make that transformation. And so when Peter's the one that I called in tears most of the time. And then he would tell me I needed to get a thicker skin. I think actually even my students saw me in tears on a number of times. How do we do that? So I'm going to try and make sense of this. So we have, like you said, we have young people and we've got older people, and a lot of people will say to me, oh my gosh, you must have young people coming in and wanting so much to transform education. And the issue is that we don't, because they've been through that system.
Yeah.
And then they go to teachers college. And there's 3 or 2 of the teacher candidates on here right now who are working with me. And just an aside, I don't know how, I actually had to leave public education to experiment to see how we can get this into schools, because I was doing it in public education. I made it work, but I walked down the hallways and felt alone, extremely alone. I do have one colleague on here, Liz Coolin, who has been a huge part of my journey. And so I don't even know where to start within the system, because I tried it and it was really, really hard. My goal with what I'm doing right now, so I have actually started up a not-for-profit private school to put pressure on the system to say, wow, look at what's happening there. How can we get that going here? And I think we need administrators who are open-minded in taking, like exactly what you're saying is, we just spent almost 2 years trying out hybrid learning. And exactly what Yong said is that so many teachers just want to go back to the way it is. And they're not taking any lessons learned from what we just did to where we need to go. To create individualized, personalized learning, for me, when I was in public education, I saw anywhere between 60 to 90 kids in a day, because I had 3 classes that could have almost 30 kids in it. And I tried to do that. I tried to bring in community. I tried to bring in retired teachers, because I couldn't personally. I did make it happen, but it wasn't sustainable. And what I want to see happen is that we get those open-minded administrators. There's also this piece of the union that plays a part in not allowing change to happen. And I want them to bring in people from the community and say, look at what the world is doing right now. This is the way we need to move forward. I'm trying to get into boards and say, I'd be happy to share what I'm doing, or let me work with, because I know what I needed when I tried this out. Sorry, it's a big question, but
no, and I appreciate that. Like, yeah, that's basically the thing, because we are at that magic point in the history of education where we're about to see huge shifts. And it's because of people like you, and it's people like us who can sit here and at least keep the conversation driving. And have that awareness piece that this is where we make change. So thank you. No, that gave me what I wanted. So thank you.
I'm about to launch a YouTube channel, and as Rebecca was talking, I was just reflecting on some of these videos. I'd love you to go and take a look when I've uploaded them in the next couple of weeks. to see the number of kids who were impacted and the way in which they could express precisely why and how powerful it is. And now I've started doing the same thing with Rebecca's Rise Academy. Kids who I've never seen before open up and describe the story and the power of the impact of when this space is created for them, opened up for them. And it awakens them. So I'd love you to go and take a look at some of those videos because it brings these words to life. Anybody else have a question or a response to Stan's brilliant question?
I think we want to hear Yong, don't we?
Yeah. We do.
Oh, you may not. But anyway, looks like Susan, you're in Argentina. I'm sending you a website. There is in Buenos Aires, I have a friend who actually set up the school called the Global School. They're doing quite amazing things. If you want to get in touch with them, and I've been in touch. He used to be of the Scott School, one of the oldest bilingual schools. He used to be the school head there for 10 or 20 years. I think.
Yeah, head of St. Andrews. He was the head of St. Andrews, the Scottish bilingual school.
Yeah, I've been to the St. Andrews school, so I just want to encourage you to check out with them. Gabriel, he's a good friend. I've been there many times. So I just want very quickly to say this, as Rebecca was right, as Fiona's story is the same thing. I have a very, very little faith in public school systems at the moment, because the systems have come to this place with its own establishment. So I want to encourage all of us to reimagine education without thinking about schooling. Reimagine education without thinking about schooling. Schools have its own grammar, its own features, have been there for a long time. And now we have very different contexts. We have technology, we have global reach, we have our own local context. And so we can create and build different learning ecosystems without having to rely on the traditional schools. I think it's changing a lot, but not enough. I really especially want to encourage people like Fiona, like students, to say, I am not going to be defined by the school. I think we need people to do that, not only changing teachers, really changing parents and changing students, to say, I refuse to be defined by the test scores and by you. That's our hope actually will have to be, because we really don't have time to retrain everybody.
Wonderful.
I would love to say everybody's face on the screen. Everybody, why people hide behind the screen. That's another interesting story. It's interesting.
It is. I'm sure there are all sorts of reasons. I'd love to hear some more comments, some more questions from people.
I would like to say that I'm very impressed with everything you're doing, and I have worked in 5 countries for long periods of time. And what strikes me about your situation in Canada is that you get a lot of support from the authorities, but you still talk about no change. Absolutely. And this is really incredible for me to learn, because I thought, you were all going off on, personalized learning, individual learning, everybody in their elements, etc., etc. So this is quite revealing for me, and it makes me feel a little less alone, as Rebecca said before when she walked along the corridor, because here in Argentina, I am really alone. Really alone.
I think once I'll speak personally to some extent. When I led that creativity movement for 12 years, I'm going to tell you, I had some very, very interesting responses, especially at the beginning, because once you stand up and speak your truth about how you really believe things need to be transformed, the status quo does not like that. And there comes with it a certain hostility. And I believe when I said to you, Rebecca, you made me sound like a real ogre when I said you needed to, what was it, get a thicker skin? Is that what you accused me of saying to you? I think what I was saying, Rebecca,
you did say it to me.
I think what I meant to say was you need a thick skin when you put your head up, right? Because somebody's going to try and take it off.
I needed to hear it. It's all good. I could take it.
I know.
I wouldn't be here without it.
No. God, I got to really be careful what I say to people. Yeah.
One of the things I really came to appreciate over the time, especially working with you, Peter, was kind of that straightforward attitude. And you'd said something earlier, and we all know it as educators within the system, that we do a lot of things in here within the school system that's change for the sake of change with no real end outcome. And we can sort of see a lot of that, right? So for instance, when I was in high school, we had basic, general, and advanced level classes. Basic kind of disappeared by my grade 10 year and was relegated back to our specialized schools. But now, taking a look, like we now have applied and college and university. So we've simply changed titles, but have left pretty much the system the same. Like, it took me several years to catch on to how come grade 9 and 10, we call it two different things. And then by grade 11 and 12, we call it something different.
Yeah.
So where can we kind of grab a hold of the baseline of this? Like I said earlier, as we're on that precipice of that change, where can we take something so that students like Fiona or some of our other kids don't feel marginalized within a system that can't barely manage to figure out what to call courses just to change the name, but yet haven't done anything to kind of change the end result?
I think if we had an answer to that question, Stan, we probably wouldn't be having this meeting. It's a profoundly challenging task. It really is. Which brings me back to this concept that keeps coming up about the new normal.
Peter and Stan, I really, today, when I look at this group here, the reason I was asking you to turn on the camera is like we are having a cult, private little meeting on the street corner. And so if we our faces will lock you up because in essence, I think the reforms we've seen, whatever they do, they try to apply to all people. As you know, public policies tend to do that. Whenever, like schools have this bad habit, whenever we discover something new, Stan, you're right, we give it a new name. We said everybody should have it. Do you see what I mean? Like, for example, social emotional learning, which when you push to an extreme, it's kind of like racism sometimes I call it, and growth mindset, I call it sometimes it's simple stupidity, right? I mean, so if you're not smart, it depends on how you apply it. I mean, if you think about growth mindset, I said, people say, Yong Zhao, you can go play football. I mean, American football. I said, no, I won't. I may have growth mindset, but I know enough. I should quit before I get started. How many Chinese have you seen surviving on the football field? But anyway, so that's the idea. I think today the conversation here is really about making changes without being quantified by the old, because the old is very hard to change. It's inventing something new. So we have this tiny meeting today. This is very sacred. It's important. That's why. Thanks, Kathy, for being brave enough to show your face. Anyway, great. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Goran.
Yeah, thank you all for an incredible and enlightening and inspiring conversation that's, I think, giving so many of us so many ideas. I just wanted to reflect on the fact that we have the pleasure and the privilege of hearing you all speak and sharing your wonderful stories on the United Nations World Creativity and Innovation Day, which is, of course, today, the 21st of April. And if you go to that page, it's interesting. They talk about creativity and innovation in problem solving, and they talk about the creative economy. And, we have talked about the information economy, and now there's increasingly thinking about shifting towards the creative economy. And I wonder whether we have truly properly reflected on what it will mean for us as a civilization, as a global set of civilizations, to actually shift to a creative economy. And I wonder whether we're hearing from you as presenters today some of these very critical perspectives in terms of what will actually be required. A number of shifts, important shifts in thinking about education and in really shifting perspectives towards, I love the sausage factory, metaphor that might have served us well, during the industrial age, but the creative economy seems to require something else. Mm-hmm. And this group here seems to be presenting really these courageous approaches that are much more, turned seemingly towards the individual creativity and the person as an enabler of this creative economy. And I just think this is so inspiring. So I'd like to thank you all.
Thank you, Goran. I think I'm going to hand it over to Stan. I'll say my thanks, huge thanks now. Time is running out. Unless anybody has a final comment that they would like to make.
I just want to make one final comment following Goran's conversation. Creativity actually is not only, like Goran said, for creative economy. Creativity makes people feel better. Actually, the process itself can be challenging, can be miserable, but that misery, you actually enjoy it. If every human being is actually creating new possibilities, new options for others, the society would have become much better. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So thanks to everybody. A special thanks to you, Yong, for taking the time out of your schedule to come and join with us, to Rebecca for giving us insight into your brilliance, and to Fiona for having spoken to me, this strange guy, all those years ago, and opened up so generously with your story. And with that, thanks to everybody. Stan, do you have any final words?
Part of our mission in every time that we gather in this forum is not necessarily to solve the problems of the world, but to try and at least open our imagination and continue with our creative drive to find a collective solution. So listening to Fiona speak and to what work Rebecca's doing, and of course being able to revisit with Yong and even you, Peter, we leave here this afternoon hopefully more engaged than when we came, but with a new passion again, right? Maybe one that we've forgotten, but that as we're shifting through the changes, it doesn't matter where we sit, both as educators, as people out in the working world, to continue to try and reimagine that learning, right? Like Yong said, a lot of our future may be putting us into a home at some later point. So we want to make sure that as they're setting us up for our future, we are definitely setting them up for theirs. And although we've made it to this point successfully, we recognize as educators, as parents, as teachers, and as life learners that so much more can be done. So walk away from this continuing the discussion and continuing the hard, strong, passionate work that each of you do with that vision in mind of continuing to reimagine learning. And we want to thank everybody this afternoon for joining us, and it has been an absolute pleasure. And we hope that you can join us again this evening to hear Peter speak at our Limitless conference for the Canadian for Scenic. Thank you.
Thanks, Stan. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.